Okay, so let's do a little thought experiment. When I say the word Kentucky, what's the first thing that pops into your head?
Oh, for me, it's got to be horses. The thoroughbreds.
Right. Galloping horses, maybe a glass of bourbon on a porch somewhere.
That whole iconic image, high school basketball, the rolling hills, it's a very specific brand of Americana.
It is. It's the bluegrass state. It feels so established, like it's always been that way.
Comfortable, but that's just the surface layer.
Exactly. And that's the mission for this deep dive. We're going to peel back that comfortable quilt and look at the much older, more complicated fabric underneath.
And we're talking way older. We're basing this on a really fantastic analysis, a text that goes way beyond the 15th state joining the Union and takes us back to 10,000 BC.
It's a huge timeline. The source is called Tex Yang Ditimpelkan, kind of a strange name, but it really unlocks the indigenous history of the region.
It does. It reframes Kentucky not as a static place on a map, but as this ancient corridor, a crossroads, and, for a long time, a battlefield.
So let's start with the basics from the text. Kentucky is technically a commonwealth. What does that actually mean for people who might not know?
It's mostly a title, really. It's one of 4 states that use that name. It just signals that the government is based on the, common consent of the people.
So it's more of a historical label than a practical difference.
Exactly. But geographically, it's this interesting pivot point. It's in the South, but sometimes it gets grouped with the Midwest.
It's kind of having an identity crisis.
Or it's just versatile. But the one thing that is absolutely grounded in reality is that nickname, the Bluegrass State.
I always just assumed that was a poetic thing, or about the music.
A lot of people do, but the source points out it is completely literal.
You mean there's actual bluegrass?
There is. The pastures are full of a type of grass, Poa pratensis, that has these bluish-purple buds when it grows tall.
Okay, but why is grass so important?
Because of what's under it. That grass grows on limestone-rich soil. The limestone puts calcium in the grass.
Which means the animals eating it get stronger bones.
Precisely. It's why the thoroughbreds thrive there today. But thousands of years ago, it supported huge herds of bison, elk, deer. That fertile ground is the engine for this whole story.
And that engine gets started a very, very long time ago. The source gives us this date, 10,000 BC. That is just hard to wrap your head around.
It's deep time. And this is where the text gives us our first real puzzle.
Okay.
Based on all the evidence from surrounding areas, Tennessee, Ohio, we're almost certain humans were in Kentucky long before 10,000 BC.
What? There's a but!
There is. The text says, and I'm quoting here, archaeological evidence of their occupation has not been documented.
So we think they were there, but we can't find them. That feels like chasing ghosts.
A little bit. But the logic holds up. I mean, you have people living all around this incredibly resource-rich area.
They wouldn't just walk around it.
No way.
Yeah.
It suggests that either the sites are just buried really deep, maybe under river floodplains, or the population was just very sparse. Small bands leaving almost no trace.
A phantom era. But then the picture starts to come into focus. The text says around 1800 BC, something big happens.
Yes, the shift from hunter-gatherer to agriculture begins.
So they're farming.
Well, yes and no. It's not what we think of as farming today. It was called the Eastern Agricultural Complex. They were domesticating local stuff. Sunflowers, goosefoot.
Sounds like a fancy salad mix.
It kind of was, but it let them stay put longer. The real revolution, the thing that changes everything, comes much later, around the 10th century CE.
This is the corn.
This is the corn.
The source gets very specific here, saying native corn varieties became highly productive. What was so special about this corn?
Calories. Pure and simple. The earlier crops were fine for supplementing a diet, but corn is like a battery. These new varieties were high yield and storable.
And a food surplus changes all the rules.
Completely. If you have extra food, you don't need everyone hunting all the time. You can have priests, chiefs, artists, and builders.
Which brings us to what I thought was the most fascinating part of the early history. Around 900 CE, Kentucky sort of splits in two.
It's a tale of two cultures. The text draws a really clear line. In the west and central parts of the state, you get the Mississippian culture.
And in the east?
The Fort Ancient culture.
So if I'm walking across Kentucky back then, say in the year 950, how do I know when I've crossed from one territory to the other?
The skyline would be the biggest giveaway. In Mississippian territory, you'd see towns built around these huge, flat-topped earthen mounds.
Like dirt pyramids.
Essentially, yeah. They were massive public works projects. They were ceremonial centers with a chief's house or a temple right on top. It implies a very hierarchical society.
The guy on top of the mound is in charge.
Definitely. But then as you walk east into the hills,
The mounds vanish.
they do. The Fort Ancient people just didn't build on that scale. Their villages were often circular, sometimes fortified, but the whole social structure seems to have been less centralized.
So the state's own geography was shaping its cultures 1,000 years ago.
Geography is destiny. But that corn revolution was fueling both of them. Populations were booming. And that boom sets the stage for the 16th century, which is just a stunningly complex picture.
This is the part that blew my mind. I think most of us have this general idea of Native Americans as one group.
A monolith. Right.
Yeah. But the source lists 5 distinct language groups all living in the area we now call Kentucky.
It wasn't a monolith. It was a mosaic. You have people speaking Iroquoian, Siwan, Algonquian, Muskogean, and Yuchi.
For someone who isn't a linguist, put that in perspective.
It's like looking at a map of modern Europe. You've got Romance languages, Germanic, Slavic. These groups were as different from each other as, say, an Italian is from a Swede.
Okay, let's try to map this out using the locations from the text so we're not just throwing names around.
Great idea. Let's do a flyover in the 1500s. If you look down at the Bluestone River area, you see the Tutello people.
The Tutello?
And what's fascinating is they were Siouan speakers. We usually think of Sioux in the Great Plains, but here they are on the edge of Appalachia.
Wow. Okay, now let's move over to the Tennessee River.
North of the river, you had the Yuchi. Their language is what we call an isolate. It's not related to anything else around it. It's unique.
And south of the river.
The Cherokee. The river was a clear boundary.
Okay, what about the heart of the state? The bluegrass region itself.
That was controlled mostly by a group the text calls the Siska.
Siska? That's not a name I hear very often.
No, they were one of the groups that got scattered early on, so they're less known. But they were a major power in the interior.
And then all the way west at the confluence of the Mississippi and the Ohio rivers.
That key strategic point belonged to the Chickasaw. So just picture that map. 5 language families, all right there, trading, competing, living.
It's crowded. It's not a wilderness. It's a fully occupied, politically complex neighborhood.
It is. And understanding the density is critical because when you have a situation like that and you introduce a major external shock, the dominoes fall.
And that shock is something called the Beaver Wars.
The Beaver Wars, from about 1640 to 1680. It's a hugely important period that often gets overlooked.
I have to admit, the name Beaver Wars sounds almost kind of cute.
It does, but the reality described in the source is anything but. It was a brutal, cascading conflict.
What was the driver?
The European fur trade. Specifically, the Iroquois Confederacy in the Northeast armed themselves with Dutch and English guns to dominate the beaver pelt trade. They began expanding violently.
And the dominoes start to fall. Where does the chain reaction begin?
Up in southern Michigan. An Algonquian tribe called the Momi, or Mascoutin, are driven out by the violence.
And they flee south into Kentucky?
Into a Kentucky that we just established is already full.
Right, so it's a refugee crisis hitting a populated area.
Exactly. The Maumee push into Kentucky, and that in turn displaces the people who were already there, the Kisboko. They get pushed eastward.
And I'm guessing the Kisboko run into somebody else.
They do. They run right into the Tutello, those Siouan speakers we mentioned. War breaks out between the displaced Kisboko and the Tutello.
So you have a tribe from Michigan pushing a tribe in Kentucky, which then attacks another tribe in Kentucky.
It's a chain reaction of displacement and violence. The text says the Tutello were forced deeper into the Appalachian Mountains and eventually had to merge with other tribes just to survive as a people. They were essentially erased from the map as an independent nation.
Just gone. Because of a war that started hundreds of miles away over beaver pelts.
It completely reshaped the human landscape. But out of that chaos, new alliances were forged. This is where the Shawnee come in.
The Shawnees are probably the tribe most people associate with Kentucky and Ohio.
Right, but the greater Shawnee nation that people like Daniel Boone later encountered was actually a product of this chaos.
How so?
The displaced Kisboko, the refugees from that conflict, eventually joined up with other scattered groups. A band of Shawnee who had split from the Powhatan on the coast, and another group called the Thawikila from Ohio.
So these broken fragments, these different refugee groups, they banded together.
They formed a new, powerful confederation to control the Ohio River Valley. They were a reconstructed society born from war.
This all helps to explain something else in the source that I think confuses a lot of people, the empty land myth.
It is probably one of the most persistent and damaging misunderstandings about this history.
So let's break it down. Early French explorers in the 17th century, they documented lots of tribes in Kentucky. It was bustling.
Yes, our crowded map from the 1500s was still largely intact then.
But then, fast forward to the mid-18th century, when American colonists start pushing in, and they report not seeing large, permanent settlements.
Right.
So from their perspective, isn't it fair to assume the land was empty? How could they know about what happened 80 years before?
It's a fair question from their limited point of view, but it led to a profoundly wrong conclusion. They saw what they called a wilderness, but what they were really seeing was a post-war zone.
The emptiness was a scar, not the natural state of things.
That is the perfect way to put it. The Beaver Wars had effectively depopulated the region of large, permanent towns. The people had been killed or scattered or had consolidated elsewhere for safety.
So the land wasn't empty, it was just different.
Exactly. It had become a buffer zone.
Right.
But the text is clear that it was still critically important land. It was a shared hunting ground.
Which brings us right back to the bluegrass and the limestone soil.
It all connects. The Cherokee from the south, the newly formed Shawnee Nation from the northeast, they sent huge hunting parties into Kentucky constantly. They fought over access to it. The so-called dark and bloody ground wasn't cursed. It was just incredibly valuable.
It really changes how you see the entire state. You realize there are just layers upon layers of history under every highway in town.
You have the undocumented people before 10,000 BC, the Mississippian mound builders, that incredible mix of 5-language families, then the refugees and the new nations forged from the Beaver Wars. It's a human story of constant change.
And incredible resilience, too. The way the Shawnee reform shows amazing political skill.
Absolutely. These weren't simple societies. They were complex nations making strategic decisions to survive a massive geopolitical crisis.
So we've covered this immense journey, from ancient mysteries to the chaos of the 17th century.
It's a lot to process.
It is, but it makes the place feel so much more real, not just a postcard.
That's always the goal, isn't it? To connect with the deeper story of a place.
I want to circle back to that first mystery before we wrap up. That undocumented period, before 10,000 BC.
The great unknown.
We know they had to be there. Logic says they were. The geography, the resources, the rivers, it's prime real estate.
It would be almost impossible for them to have just skipped it.
So here's the final thought I want to leave with you listening to this. If Kentucky was such a nexus for all these later cultures, the Mississippians, the Fort Ancients, all those 16th century tribes, what is still sitting under the bluegrass that we just haven't found yet?
That is the multi-million-dollar question in archaeology.
I mean, could there be a discovery just a few feet under a horse pasture that completely rewrites the timeline of people in North America?
It's not just possible. I'd say it's probable that major discoveries are still waiting. And our technology for finding them is getting better every single year.
How so?
We have things like LiDAR now. It's a laser system on a plane that can see through the forest canopy and map the ground in incredible detail. We're finding ancient earthworks, roads, entire settlements that were invisible 10 years ago.
So the history book isn't finished. It's not even close.
Not even close. The next chapter of Kentucky's deepest history might already be saved on a hard drive somewhere, just waiting for the right person to see the pattern.
On that thought, we'll leave you to it. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
My pleasure. Always keep digging.
We'll see you next time.